The automatic doors of the emergency room slid open with a hushed whoosh, letting in the cold night air. A nurse at the reception desk barely had time to glance up before a large, mud-covered German shepherd darted inside, its nails clicking against the polished floor. Gasps rippled through the waiting area. Patients and hospital staff froze, watching as the dog skidded to a stop, its sides heaving with exhaustion. Blood, some dried, some fresh, matted its thick fur. Its left front paw was raised slightly, as though injured, but the animal didn't slow. It moved with a determined urgency, its ears twitching at the hum of medical monitors and hurried conversations around it. A security guard stepped forward, hand instinctively reaching for the radio clipped to his belt. "Someone lose a dog?" he muttered, shifting his stance as if expecting the animal to lunge. Instead, the dog let out a desperate whimper and turned its amber eyes toward a group of nurses, its gaze flicking between them as if pleading for something none of them could understand. Dr. Emily Carter had seen her share of strange cases in the ER, freak accidents, unlikely survivals, even the occasional oddity that defied explanation, but never in her years of practice had she seen a dog charge into the hospital with such purpose. She had been reviewing a patient's chart when the animal's arrival disrupted the ordered chaos of the emergency wing. She stepped closer, her brow furrowed in concern. The German shepherd's body language wasn't aggressive, if anything, it was desperate. The dog limped forward, stopping just inches from her. Then, before she could react, it did something that sent a chill through her. It gently tugged at the sleeve of her coat with its teeth. A murmur spread among the onlookers. Dr. Carter crouched, meeting the dog's eyes. There was intelligence there, something far beyond the usual instinctive behavior of a lost or frightened animal. "What is it?" she murmured, extending her hand cautiously. The dog didn't flinch, didn't growl. It simply released her sleeve and whined again, eyes darting toward the hallway leading to the ICU. It wanted her to follow. One of the nurses, a young woman named Valerie, shifted uncomfortably. "Should we call animal control?" she asked, glancing at Dr. Carter. The dog let out a sharp bark, making several people jump. Then it turned and bolted down the hall. For a brief second, no one moved. Then, instinct overrode logic, and Dr. Carter took off after it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she hurried past sterile white walls and closed doors. The dog moved swiftly despite its injuries, glancing back every few steps as if checking that she was still behind. Something about this felt wrong. Not just unusual, but deeply unsettling. Dogs didn't just break into hospitals. And they certainly didn't know where to go inside one. The German shepherd suddenly skidded to a stop, its claws scraping against the linoleum floor. It was standing in front of room 314, a private ICU unit. The door was closed, but the dog was pawing at it frantically, letting out low, urgent whines. Dr. Carter hesitated. This room belonged to an unidentified patient. The man had been brought in the night before, found unconscious in an alley, no ID, no records. A possible hit and run, though there had been no witnesses, no evidence of a car nearby. He had suffered multiple injuries, but nothing fatal. Still, he hadn't regained consciousness. The dog's barking grew louder, almost panicked now. Something was wrong inside that room. "Dr. Carter?" Valerie had caught up, panting slightly. "What's going on?" "I don't know," she said, pressing the keypad to unlock the door. The second the lock beeped, the dog shoved past her, nearly knocking her over in its desperation to get inside. She followed quickly, heart pounding. The ICU was dimly lit, the only sounds the rhythmic beep of the monitors and the soft hiss of the oxygen supply. The man in the hospital bed lay motionless, his face partially obscured by an oxygen mask. But something wasn't right. The dog's growls had turned into deep, guttural snarls, its body low to the ground as it stared at the four-drip. Dr. Carter's gaze followed, and her stomach dropped. The four-bag wasn't the one she had ordered for this patient. With a sinking feeling, she stepped closer, eyes scanning the label. This dosage was far higher than what had been prescribed. Lethal, even. Asterisk asterisk. A slow horror crept up her spine. Someone had tampered with the medication. She turned, pressing the emergency call button. The room flooded with activity within moments. Nurses, orderlies, another doctor rushing in. The 4 was swapped out immediately, the patient checked for signs of distress. But the real question remained. Who had done this? And how had the dog known? Asterisk asterisk. The German shepherd sat by the bedside now, its snarls gone, replaced by a deep, protective silence. Dr. Carter exhaled slowly, looking between the unconscious man and the dog still guarding him. She had no idea how, but this dog had just saved a life. The atmosphere in the ICU was thick with unease. The beep of the heart monitor had steadied, but the implications of what had just happened sent a chill through Dr. Carter's veins. Someone had tried to kill this man, right under their noses. And if it weren't for the dog, they would have succeeded. Rex, as his tag read, had not moved from his position beside the hospital bed. His body was tense, ears flicking at every sound, as if expecting another threat to emerge from the shadows. Dr. Carter knelt beside him, running a careful hand over his matted fur. Up close, she could see the cuts and bruises hidden beneath the dirt, injuries that looked suspiciously fresh. "You didn't just wander in here, did you?" she murmured, more to herself than the dog. Rex huffed softly but didn't break eye contact with his unconscious owner. "Dr. Carter." She turned to see Valerie hovering near the door, her expression troubled. "Security's reviewing the footage now. If someone tampered with that 4, there should be something on the cameras." Dr. Carter straightened. "Good. And what about him?" She gestured toward the patient. "Any progress on identifying him?" Valerie hesitated. "Nothing yet. He had no wallet, no phone, nothing. We only got a name because of the dog's microchip." She sighed. "David Miller. That's all we know. David Miller." The name felt incomplete, as though it were missing a history, a past that had been deliberately erased. Rex let out a low, rumbling growl. Dr. Carter followed his gaze. Outside the ICU, a man in scrubs stood at the nurse's station, his back to them. Something about him set her on edge. He wasn't speaking to anyone, wasn't holding a chart, just lingering. As if sensing her eyes on him, he turned slightly. His face was partially obscured by the angle, but she caught the sharp cut of his jaw, the too neutral expression. Then, as if deciding he had lingered too long, he pivoted and walked briskly down the hall, disappearing through the double doors leading to the stairwell. Rex let out another soft growl, his body shifting as if he wanted to chase after the man. Dr. Carter placed a hand on the dog's head, both to reassure him and to still the sudden knot of unease forming in her stomach. Whoever that was, he had been watching, and now he was gone. Hours passed in a slow, heavy crawl. The hospital night shift settled into its usual rhythm, nurses moving from room to room, the distant hum of medical equipment filling the silence between whispered conversations. Yet, beneath it all, an undercurrent of tension remained. Dr. Carter found herself in the security office, standing shoulder to shoulder with Officer Tate, one of the hospital's senior security personnel, as they reviewed the surveillance footage. "Here," Tate muttered, pointing at the screen. The grainy black and white video showed the ICU hallway from earlier in the night. A shadow moved into frame, a man in dark clothing, face obscured by a surgical mask and a cap pulled low over his forehead. He approached David Miller's room, glancing around before disappearing inside. Less than a minute later, he emerged again, his movements quick and efficient. Dr. Carter's stomach twisted. It was premeditated. Whoever this was knew exactly what they were doing. Tate rewound the footage, freezing the frame just as the intruder turned slightly. It was hard to make out details, but Dr. Carter's breath caught. There. The gloved hand slipping into the pocket of his coat. She had seen that movement before. Just hours ago. At the nurse's station. Her pulse kicked up. The man lurking outside David's room, the one who had walked away the moment she noticed him. Could it be the same person? Tate cursed under his breath. We'll run facial recognition, but with the mask it's gonna be tough. He sighed. If this guy's still in the building, we need to find him. Dr. Carter barely heard him. She was already moving, heart pounding in her ears. She needed answers. Back at David's bedside, Rex lifted his head the moment she walked in. Dr. Carter exhaled. We might have a problem, buddy. The dog huffed, as if he understood. She turned her attention to David, who remained eerily still, save for the steady rise and fall of his chest. His face was pale under the sterile hospital lights, a faint bruise still visible along his temple. Who are you? She wondered. And what did you do to make someone want you dead? Rex nudged his nose against David's arm, letting out a soft whine. It was an image so achingly loyal that it made her chest tighten. Then, before she could turn away, something happened that made her freeze. David's fingers twitched. It was faint, barely there, but unmistakable. Rex immediately perked up, his entire body going still. Another twitch. Then, ever so slowly, David Miller's eyelids fluttered open. Dr. Carter's breath caught. For a long moment, his gaze was unfocused, blinking against the bright light. But then, his expression shifted, his body going rigid. Pure fear flooded his face. No, he rasped. His voice was raw, weak. No, no, no. Dr. Carter stepped forward, hands raised in a calming motion. Hey, it's okay. You're safe. You're in the hospital. David's breathing was erratic. His eyes darted around wildly before locking onto Rex. Recognition flashed in them. Rex let out a whimper, stepping closer, and something in David's face crumpled. His fingers curled weakly toward the dog's fur. Dr. Carter felt the tension in her shoulders ease, but only slightly. David Miller was alive, but terrified. And that meant one thing. Whoever had tried to kill him was still out there. David's breathing was ragged, his chest rising and falling in sharp, shallow movements. His fingers trembled against Rex's fur, gripping the dog like an anchor, as if letting go would pull him back into the depths of whatever nightmare he had just escaped. Dr. Carter placed a calming hand on his arm. David, you're safe. You're in St. Vincent's Hospital. You were brought in last night. Do you remember what happened? His eyes darted around the room, still clouded with confusion. He swallowed, wincing as if the movement hurt. Then, in a hoarse whisper, he asked, "Where is he?" Dr. Carter exchanged a glance with Valerie, who had just stepped in. "Who?" she pressed gently. David's grip on Rex tightened. The dog made a soft, reassuring noise, but his own posture remained tense, as if he too was waiting for an answer. David's gaze flickered to the open door. His voice dropped lower, barely audible. "The man who tried to kill me." The room went still. Dr. Carter kept her voice even. "David, we have security looking into it. But we need to know, who is he? Why would someone want to hurt you?" David squeezed his eyes shut for a long moment, as if searching for the right words, or deciding how much to reveal. Then, exhaling shakily, he spoke. "I work in corporate security," he rasped. "Private sector. Not for a company, freelance. A few weeks ago, I was hired by an anonymous client to investigate missing medical shipments. High-value pharmaceuticals disappearing before they reached hospitals." He paused, shifting uncomfortably. "I didn't think much of it at first. Probably an inside job. Some low-level employees selling off supplies. But then..." His breath hitched. Rex let out a soft whine, nudging David's arm. Dr. Carter leaned in. "Then what?" David's fingers twitched. "Then I found something I wasn't supposed to." A long silence stretched between them. "David," she said carefully, "what did you find?" His eyes flicked to the 4-bag beside him. A shiver passed through him. Drugs were going missing from hospitals, yes, but not to be sold. They were being replaced with counterfeit versions. Cheaper, unregulated, dangerous substitute. Someone was making millions, maybe more, supplying hospitals with fakes that looked real but had no active ingredients. His voice dropped even lower. I traced it back to a distribution hub in the city. But before I could report it, before I could figure out who was running it, someone found me first. Dr. Carter felt the weight of his words settle heavily in her chest. So they tried to get rid of you, she murmured. David nodded weakly. I don't know how they found out I was onto them. I was careful. I used burner phones, encrypted everything. But someone must have been watching me. He exhaled. I don't remember much after that. Just running. And Rex. His gaze softened as he looked at the dog. He saved me, David whispered. I was unconscious in that alley. I should have died there. But he must have dragged me out, gotten me help. And then... He looked around the hospital room, realization dawning in his expression. He found me again, didn't he? Dr. Carter nodded. He ran in here, straight to your room, she said. And he stopped whoever tampered with your four. David exhaled sharply. His fingers curled into a fist. They're still trying, he muttered. Whoever did this, they won't stop. Rex suddenly let out a low, warning growl. Dr. Carter turned toward the doorway, following the dog's gaze. A man in scrubs stood just beyond the threshold, half hidden by the hallway's dim lighting. Her heart skipped. The figure wasn't moving, just watching. Then, the moment their eyes met, he turned sharply and walked away. David struggled to sit up, wincing. That's him, he gasped. That's the man I saw before I blacked out. Dr. Carter didn't hesitate. She spun toward Valerie. Get security. Now. Valerie didn't need to be told twice. She rushed down the hall, disappearing around the corner. Dr. Carter turned back to David. Stay here. Don't move. Then she ran. The hospital corridors blurred as she sprinted after the disappearing figure. The sound of her own pulse pounded in her ears, but she pushed forward, forcing her legs to move faster. The man in scrubs turned down a hallway, a staff-only area and for a moment, she thought she'd lost him. But then, a door at the end of the corridor clicked shut. Dr. Carter didn't slow. She shoved through, emerging into a stairwell. Her breath caught. He was 2 flights below, moving fast. But something was wrong. The way he moved, his posture, his stride, it wasn't the hurried panic of someone caught off guard. No. This was controlled. Planned. He wasn't running to escape. He was leading her. A sudden dread clawed up her spine. She reached the next landing, gripping the metal railing. And then, the lights cut out. The stairwell plunged into darkness. A beat of silence. Then, below, a door creaked open. Footstep. Then nothing. Dr. Carter's breath came fast, her pulse hammering. She wasn't alone in the stairwell. And whoever was down there was waiting for her. Dr. Carter pressed herself against the cold concrete wall, her breath shallow. The stairwell was pitch black, the emergency lighting having failed, or been cut. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to get security, to not walk into the trap that had been laid for her. But she had already come this far. Somewhere below, the door had creaked open. Someone was waiting. She exhaled slowly, centering herself. Then, carefully, she descended the next step. A distant noise echoed from below, a shift of weight, a faint scrape of a shoe against the floor. He was still there. Dr. Carter's pulse thundered. She reached into her coat pocket and found a pen. Useless against a real weapon, but it was something. Another step. The air in the stairwell felt denser now, suffocating. She rounded the landing, moving purely by muscle memory. The exit door below loomed as a faint outline in the dark. Then, a sudden, sharp rustle. Too close. She barely had time to react before a shape lunged from the shadows. A hand clamped around her wrist, shoving her hard against the wall. Pain shot up her spine. Her attacker was strong, too strong, pinning her with practiced ease. Her free hand jabbed out blindly, and the pen met flesh. A grunt of pain, her attacker staggered back, just enough for her to twist away. The emergency lights flickered back on, casting a dim, eerie glow over the stairwell. And then she saw him. The man from the ICU hallway. His scrubs were stained with fresh blood, hers, probably. Gloved hands, a mask covering half his face. But his eyes, cold, sharp, clinical. No panic. No hesitation. Only calculation. Dr. Carter's stomach dropped. This wasn't just a desperate man covering his track. This was a professional. Asterisk. He straightened, rolling his shoulder like an inconvenience rather than an injury. You shouldn't have followed, he murmured. His voice was calm, almost bored. Dr. Carter's grip tightened on the pen. You shouldn't have tampered with my patients for. Something in his gaze flickered. Amusement? Annoyance? It was impossible to tell. I don't know what you think you've uncovered, doctor, he said, stepping toward her. Too casual. Too controlled. Asterisk, but you're in over your head. Dr. Carter's breath came faster, her heart slamming against her ribs. Then, asterisk, a new sound. Asterisk. A low, deep growl. The man stilled. A blur of movement shot through the stairwell door. The German shepherd launched himself at the attacker, a snarl ripping through the air. The man barely had time to react before Rex's jaws clamped down on his arm. A yell, more surprise than pain. The first real crack in his composure. Dr. Carter didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, slamming her full weight against him. The man stumbled. His balance broke. And then, he went over the railing. A sharp, terrible crash echoed through the stairwell as he hit the landing below. For a long moment, everything was still. Then, a shallow, rattling breath. Dr. Carter forced herself to move. She crept toward the edge, peering down. The man was sprawled awkwardly, a pool of blood forming beneath his head. His chest still moved, but barely. She exhaled shakily. Rex stood beside her, still bristling, but his eyes flicked up to hers. Checking her. Making sure she was safe. Dr. Carter reached down, running a hand over his fur. Good boy, she whispered. Then, sirens. Heavy boots pounding up the stairwell. Security finally arriving. It was over. Hours later, the hospital was quieter. The police had taken her statement. Security footage had confirmed everything. Asterisk, David's attacker had been working under a stolen identity, slipping into hospitals unnoticed. Asterisk. Who he worked for was still unknown. But now, at least, they had a lead. David sat upright in his hospital bed, Rex curled up beside him. Dr. Carter stood by the doorway, watching. You saved my life, David said suddenly, his voice still rough. Dr. Carter shook her head. Rex did. David looked down at the dog, something unreadable in his gaze. A moment of silence passed. Then, he exhaled. This isn't over, he murmured. Dr. Carter knew he was right. But for now, at least, they had won.